Hi everyone, welcome to the exposition of the divine principles. In this presentation we'll be looking at a few different aspects, especially the spiritual principles underpinning not just the history in the Bible, but the current reality as we see it, a fundamental reality. Before I do dive into that, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the story of Tamar. This is a really odd story that when you read it, you really wonder, what is it doing in the Bible? Very bizarre story. So it starts with Judah, one of the sons, the third son of Israel, or Jacob. He had three sons by his wife. And the first son he married to a woman named Tamar. Now, it happened that his first son, the Bible accounts that his first son displeased God. And so he died, was struck dead. Now, in the Jewish tradition, when the eldest son dies, then without any children, or if any son dies, then the wife, the widow, ought to have a son by the next, one of the brothers. So in this case, Tamar went to the second eldest. And they should have a son, and then that son ought to be named after the first son to continue the lineage. This was the tradition of the time. They placed a lot of importance on lineage, and still do. Very important thing. So Tamar was passed to the second son. The second son also spilled his seed, did not impregnate her, and ended up dying. So now Judah has had two of his sons die. And he becomes very worried that if he passes Tamar to his third son, his youngest, that he will also share the same fate and die. Like, my gosh, my daughter-in-law must be cursed or something. So he says, go and live as a widow with your parents until my third son is ready of age, and then we'll organize something. But he really had no intention of giving Tamar to his third son. And so Tamar did what any reasonable person would do. She dressed up as a shrine prostitute and laid in wait for Judah to come by and sleep with him. Again, what was Judah doing sleeping with shrine prostitutes? His wife had passed away, so I don't know. But it's a bit of a bizarre story. So he agrees to sleep with her and to offer her a sheep, and she takes his staff and ring and cord as a kind of a down payment, so to hold on to until he gives it to the sheep to her. Anyway, she goes away and goes back to being a widow, and Judah can't find this shrine prostitute that he slept with, but he says, oh well, whatever, I'll keep my sheep and she can keep my staff and ring. And then after a few months, word gets to him and they say, oh, your daughter-in-law, she's prostituted herself and become pregnant. And he says, oh, well, we ought to kill her because that was the custom. Again, doesn't sound particularly fair. Anyway, Tamar brings out the staff and ring and says, I was become pregnant by the person who belongs to these items. And that's Judah recognizes, she's more righteous than me because I would not give her a son, so she came and has had a son through me. Very bizarre story when you think about in the context of the Bible. It's even more bizarre when you think that when you know that through the lineage of Judah, through that lineage comes, after 40 generations after Perez, comes Jesus. And the thing that we all remember about the story of Tamar was Perez and Zerah. Zerah was they were the twins that were born to her from Judah. Zerah was supposed to come out first. His hand came out and they tied a ribbon around it or a cord or something. But then he was pulled back in and Perez came out. There was a switching of elder and younger in the womb. So Perez came out as kind of the firstborn, even though Zerah was really the elder son. What's going on here? This is a very bizarre story if you look at it from face value. And what you come to understand is that in order to understand what's happening here and what's happening throughout the Bible, you need to know two things. First of all, you need to know what is God attempting to accomplish. Without knowing that, you're going to miss the point of a lot of these biblical stories. The second point you need to understand is what is the method by which God works? Because God isn't acting at random. He's not rolling the dice and hoping high. He has a very particular method in which he is working. And you can see that throughout the Bible. And that's something we look at in the divine principle. One of the first things that we kind of come to understand about human beings and about life in general is that we're all seeking to achieve, maybe is not the right word, achieve happiness, become happy. We're trying to avoid misfortune and seek and possess happiness. Possess is probably a better word. That seems to be our modus operandi. That's what we are attempting to do throughout our lives. Yet we do find that this is an increasingly difficult task to accomplish. It's almost as if within ourselves we work against our own interests. We call this, in Christianity, we call that fallen human nature. In another way we can put it, we can say that's the human condition, where we have kind of an original mind and an evil mind. And St. Paul put it very succinctly in Romans 7, verse 21 to 23. He said, although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being, I delight in God's word. But I see another law at work within me, waging war against my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin. Who will save me from this body of sin? He talks about these two constituents within himself. And indeed, when we consider ourselves, I mean, we know what goodness is, right? We all have that concept of what a good person would be if you think about it. In Corinthians, they list out what a good person is, and it's quite a comprehensive list. They think of other people, they always put others before themselves. We know what it is. It's unselfishness. Someone who acts unselfishly all the time. That's a good person. Have you ever met someone like that? I know maybe one or two people. I'm sure they're not perfect, but they really just overflow with generosity and care for others. And you think you're like, wow, that person there, that's a saint right there. Like, whoo, amazing. And you probably know a few people as well who really are very self-absorbed and really selfish. And we recognize this self-centered desire as our evil mind, as the basis of all wickedness, is when we put our own desires above that of other people, of our friends, our family, or the people we meet. And that standard is a universal standard. All human beings have this standard. And when we measure ourselves to our own standard of what is good, we find we don't actually achieve it. Even these wonderful people we know, I'm sure if you ask them, hey, do you think you're a good person? Initially they might say, oh, yeah, but usually the more humble, will say immediately no. But even with sober judgment, when we judge ourselves against the standard that we believe is good, we find ourselves shortcoming. We don't achieve that standard of goodness that we know to be true. We can only do it when, I don't want to be too negative, but we do find that contradiction within ourselves. We always know when we do something that is not right. Now, in Christianity, like I said, we talk about the human fall. We have the story in Genesis that really encapsulates what really went wrong. And it's a very interesting study of what was the core or fundamental reason behind humankind's separation from God, or separation from that original ideal. We look at that in the second chapter of our Divine Principles study. But where this left humankind was that we were left in a really ignorant situation where we have both a mind and a body. We have our physical, malleable, tangible body, but we also behind that have a character. We have a personality. We have a mind or a spirit. There's some kind of internal nature driving us. And we see that in throughout all creation. We see it in animals. We see it in plants. Very interesting studies done with plants. We also see it in the mineral world, in the most fundamental building blocks of all matter. We see that they move according to some sort of internal nature. And so we can talk about having an internal intellect and an external intellect, which is something that when we're born, we're completely ignorant of. And after humanity's conception, we were completely ignorant of it as well. We never really understood what is the absolute truth behind the universe, the fundamental laws that exist. We're getting there, we're learning them, but we came from a point of ignorance. And in order to overcome these two ignorance, we developed two kinds of different schools of thought. So we had religion was built up in order to resolve internal truth. It's very interesting that as humanity begun, that this was kind of the more dominant path for seeking truth. And it's not separate. It wasn't separate in the beginning. Religion and science tended to be the same undertaking, which is the much more natural state of things. Science, again, attempting to resolve external ignorance and bring forth external truth. How do things work? The internal truth being a bit more like, why do things work? And then we saw perhaps in the last five or 600 years, religion and science began to diverge. And especially in the last 100 years, the 20th century, we saw really they began to separate and fight with each other and really view each other. Religion really viewed science as something that was trying to destroy the internal truths. And the science really saw religion as something that was fake and not real. However, this again, a very unnatural state. In order to realize true goodness, we need to come to a fundamental new truth that will be not just a union of religion and science, but it will be something greater than the sum of its parts. It won't be a religious science or a scientific religion, but it will just be a fundamental truth. And only through that will humanity be able to realize true goodness. It's like it says in the Bible, here in 1 Peter, talking about a new truth being revealed at the end of days, in the last days, which, again, we study into. Doesn't mean the end of the world, as some might believe, but during the last days, that's when a new truth will come. And surely when we have a look at human history, we do find new truths arriving periodically throughout human history. New truth doesn't diminish the current reality. It just gives us a deeper, more enlightened insight as to what we are dealing with in our experience. So it's not something we should fear. But it is no doubt that many Christians, especially over the last 100 years, the 20th century was a huge turning point for many different reasons in history. And, people are expecting this new truth to come. Not just Christians, by the way. That's a prophecy that has been a reality in many different religions, of the expectation of someone coming and revealing a bit more. So this new truth should be able to unite all religions, all ideologies and philosophies, because what we do find is that fundamentally they have their differences, of course, but they're all teaching the same guidelines, the same principles and fundamental laws. Reverend Moon put together scholars from all the major religions and many of minor religions, and attempted for them to clarify what is the difference, how much is similar and how much is difference. It was called the World Scriptures. It's a book you can buy, and it had a look at what is how similar are the teachings. And what they found was that all these scholars, they found that about 70% of the fundamental teachings of each religion was the same. Now, what does that tell you? I'll tell you what it tells me. It tells me that all of these religions are connecting to the same truth. That there is that 30% that's not nominal. There's a difference in our customs and our culture, the way we do things, but 70% the same. It's telling me that they're connecting to the same spirit, to the same principle, the same God, I would say. So all of these ideologies, religions and philosophies, they tend to focus on what is the difference between them, when in fact they ought to be focusing on what is the similarity. Because once we focus on the similarity and we have that common ground, then we can get into a give and take, and we can find unity between each other. That's how they will be able to guide fallen people back to the original state. Because remember, all of these barriers that we've put up between each other, they're what William Blake, the English poet, called mind-forged manacles. They're within our mind. Actually, there should not be too much to stop two human beings from interacting in a friendly and cooperative and productive manner, having unity, having a unselfish motivation for working together. This is what the new truth should be able to help human beings accomplish. So we're going to have a look at the divine principle. We're going to have a look at many of these topics and go into depth. We do, of course, follow Christian, kind of the Christian history, Christian tradition, or the Jewish tradition, we could probably say, focusing on the Bible, because that, in Oceania, the majority of people are Christian, so it makes sense. If we did this in India, let's say, we would probably have to focus on Hinduism, right? But what we want to look at in the principle of creation is the fundamental law that is underlying the fundamental reality of our existence, of our universe. There should be some fundamental universal rules and laws. And what we find is that there are. And we can say that's the fingerprint of God. In the fall, we look at, okay, so there were some laws and rules set down by God. He had a plan. He had a desire for this world. What happened? There was something that separated humanity in its inception. And this is, again, not just a Christian idea. These ideas are found throughout all religions. This example I like to give is Pandora's box, which, if you think about it, is very similar to the story of Adam and Eve, in that there was something that they were not supposed to do, but they ended up doing. They were enticed by their desire to do, by their kind of, we would say, fallen desire. Desire is not bad. Having desire is natural, but it shouldn't bring you to do something selfish or wrong, So we look into that. We look into that very deeply on what was the meaning and what is the symbolism behind the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. And then we have a look at restoration. So God had a plan, and then there was some problem. The plan had a very big problem. What then did God do in an attempt to fix that problem? We look at restoration, and we follow first the history of the Hebrews, the Israelites, the children of Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What was God doing in this story in the Old Testament, or the stories, I should say? Now, the Bible was written by many people over, an enormous period of time. So it's kind of, you really have to understand that viewpoint when you're reading it. And also, as I mentioned at the start, you need those two fundamental concepts. What's God trying to do? And what's the method by which God is trying to work? And when you understand those 2 points, then stories like Tamar, stories like Abraham's sacrifice of Jacob, all these stories that are a little difficult to understand from our kind of modern viewpoint become very clear. And we see that law play out throughout biblical history. And even beyond, when we begin to look at Christian history, we see the same fundamental laws at play and the same restorative process go through. And this is something that's really unique about the divine principle. Most studies of biblical history or law they stop at, when the Bible stops. They don't go looking at Christian history. But what we see is a signature, a pattern that is playing out again and again over the 6,000 biblical year history. So it brings us also up to our current era, and this is where the importance of knowing the divine principle really comes in, because it gives us an understanding of where we go from here. What is our current mission? What is God expecting of you and I in this current day and age? So I really hope you can join us for the divine principle. We have lectures every Tuesday and Wednesday, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. In fact, next week, we're starting fresh from the principle of creation on Wednesday. We also have 2-day workshops. Currently, we're under lockdown, so we will be announcing later on when the 2-day workshop will be. But we hope you can see you there, where we can, have some more deeper discussions and really search for what is that kind of fundamental truth. So thank you so much, brothers and sisters, for joining. I pray you stay safe and see you later.